lesson is for lesson number 10 in our study in Proverbs. It covers Proverbs chapter number 29 from verses 1 through 3 and then from verses 12 to 20. If I were to ask you to tell us a story about when you got in the most trouble growing up, maybe when you were a little kid, what did you do and what was your discipline? Be kind of an interesting story. I'd love to hear what it was for you. We've all gotten in trouble growing up, and none of us love that word. Probably when you were a kid, you probably didn't love that word discipline. But discipline was good for you. Now, the discipline that you got is reaping a reward, isn't it? And there is so much wisdom in living a life of discipline. That's really the theme of this particular text, this idea of discipline. When we think about discipline, we don't usually think about freedom and blessing and favor, but yet all real freedom comes as a result of discipline at some level. And so the big idea for this week's lesson, and I'm going to try to keep this video very brief, the big idea is this idea of discipline and embracing discipline. We want those hearing this lesson to make a decision to buy into this idea that they need to embrace discipline in their lives. That a key to blessing and favor and the kind of outcomes that they want in their life happens when they embrace discipline. Now, why should they embrace it? Well, there's three patterns that I want to show you in these verses. I'm going to use one verse for each of these points, although in our notes that you're going to see below this video on the blog, we cover several different scriptures under each one of these points. But I'm going to pick out one verse for each of these different patterns. There's three patterns that show up over and over and over again in these particular verses. The first pattern is this pattern of leadership and discipline. Leadership and discipline. And one of the most clear places that it comes up is in verse number 19. And verse 19 says, "A servant will not be corrected by words, for though he understand, he will not answer." The idea here is that he's saying if all you use is words to correct somebody who's following you, then you probably won't get the outcome that you want. People don't always just respond to when you tell them to do something. There has to be accountability and action involved in that. The Bible says, or it's an old saying, the Bible doesn't say this, but there's this old saying that people do what you inspect, not what you expect. I think there's some truth to that. When you sit on the couch and tell your child, hey, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that, and you never get up and enforce what you're supposed to be doing, it probably won't go the way you want it to. You're actually training your child that they don't have to listen to you until you get up. And so that's the idea of this idea of leaders. Sometimes they are self-disciplined, and then they enforce and they discipline those. They want accountability and action in and around people in there. If people that follow them. If you, I put out my notes on this particular thing. All of the blue, you can just kind of see from there. All of the blue speak about the people that leaders are affecting, and all of the yellow in here are dealing with leaders and what goes on there. And so you can see there's a lot of action there when it comes to leaders and discipline. Leaders, good leaders, are leaders who are disciplined and then who enforce discipline themselves. And pattern number 2 is discipline and blessing. Discipline and blessing. And for this, I'm going to give you the example of verse number 15. It says, "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." Here you have, in this particular verse, it says rod and reproof. The rod speaking of like a paddle. And the Bible doesn't advocate child abuse at all, but it does talk about enforcing corporal punishment, using a little bit of pain as a motivator to help people, to help the child make a decision. It says here, rod and reproof, and it really takes both. There's not just the sting of the paddle, there's also the teaching in the moment. But there's not just the teaching in the moment for little kids, because kids don't always understand all of our words. So you use kind of a both thing. And it says the rod and reproof give wisdom. There's several of the verses like that. Let me look for another verse. It says, where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. When someone's disciplined to keep the law, it says happy is he. There's blessing that comes from the discipline of doing the right thing. And so you'll see over and over again in these verses a pattern of discipline bringing about blessing. There's favor and good results that come when there's discipline. But then there's this last pattern, rebellion and destruction. And probably the best example of this particular pattern is in verse 1. He says, he that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. You know, the person that this person has hardened his neck. This is someone who gets corrected a lot. It says that being often reproved. This is someone who's constantly corrected, who just is stubborn and won't do what you tell them to do. That rebellious spirit leads to, it says here, that person shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. There is a consequence to fighting discipline, where you'll get consequences in your life that, if you aren't careful, are the kind of consequences that can't be undone. And so there's a pattern. Notice the pattern. Leaders affect their followers. When they're self-disciplined, they can help lead others towards discipline, towards following the Lord, towards obedience. When there's obedience and discipline, that leads to blessing. But when there's disobedience and rebellion, that leads to destruction. So the question is, what kind of life do you want to have? Do you want to have destruction? Go with rebellion. Do you want to have blessing? Then be self-disciplined and follow those in your life that are trying to help promote discipline in your life, so that it brings about blessing. This pattern is throughout this particular passage. And although it's not necessarily the kind of topic that everybody loves to talk about, hey, let's talk about discipline, we know that there is so much freedom that comes when we live lives that are obedient, that are submissive, that are disciplined. I hope this has helped you. I hope that this gives you a framework to look through this passage, and I hope that this is used in the lives of your people to help them get this result, blessing, more than that result, destruction. Hey, have a great week.